kind of where people are dropping in from. And then Ivana's going to give us a kind of insight into or overview of what demand side management actually is and why we're transitioning more towards that than supply side management. So if you're not an energy expert, don't worry. We're going to have plenty to do anyways, and you get some fundamental knowledge of what we're talking about. Then we're going to jump into three different rooms depending on your interests. So we're going to look at this mapping from in three different ways and from three different perspectives just to get a good coverage. Then from there on, we'll spend some time mapping out and discussing different stakeholders and what they can do and what's happening in the energy systems around the world. And then we'll just regroup, share a little bit of our key insights, and then we'll take the evening. So if you scoot on to the right, and also don't forget, there's a link in the chat here in Zoom, which takes you to this mirror board so that everything can be interactive. So you don't have to follow along fully on the shared screen here, but you can follow along on the mirror board and interact with what we're doing. So please find that link and head over onto the mirror board where you can take a different colored dot depending on what kind of industry you identify as coming from. I know that these boundaries are sometimes different, not as easy to adhere to, which is why we added the other one, Joss, that's specifically for you who identify as a interdisciplinary person. Myself, I'm an academic one and position in Sweden, so that's where I'm going to put that. This is just for us to get an overview of which kind of perspectives we have represented here in the hub. So yeah, we had some people dropping in. So for all of you, there's a link in the chat which takes you to the mirror board. Just place where you're coming from and where you're coming from, if that makes sense. And then we'll get an introduction from Ivana about demand side management. So we got a lot of UK representation. Fairly eastern bound as well. Wonderful.
Visiting,
we got the US
here.
Right. Wonderful. So whilst we're finishing that off, I'll kind of segue us into the next segment here, which Ivana is gonna tell you, spend some more time on. But demand side management is really something that you can stay on the map, Anya. We'll give it one more minute here. But why this is important, why it's such a timely topic. From time and time again, every report we read regarding energy transitions around the world, the emphasis on demand side management is really increasing. As things become less plannable, more volatile, we realize that we can't just turn the knob up in our production in order to meet that demand. Sometimes we have to turn things off instead. So I'm glad to see that we have a lot of different nationalities in place here, so we can get that breadth of perspectives on that, because these things really differ. Even though we use similar technologies, the legislations and the actors are very different. To those of you joining now, please find the link in the chat here on Zoom, which takes you to the mirror board, where we do things a bit more interactively. Place a dot on the map where you're from. And wonderful. Ivana, please.
Yeah, this will I could talk about this for a while, but I just kind of want to give you a sense of like flavor of what we will be talking about when we create our stakeholder maps. And this figure doesn't fit 100% what I'm going to tell you, but it's supposed to somewhat give you the ideas of the dimensions we're talking about and the different aspects we have to look into. So before we get started, it's kind of important to clear what do we mean with supply and demand side management. It could be really anything. So when we talk about the supply side in the energy sector, it's pretty much like everything. Any supply in any areas, any economic areas. So it's basically the part of the energy value chain that really focuses on the production, transmission, and distribution of energy of any form. Today we'll focus on electricity, from something that is rather centralized at the current stage of the energy sector I'm in, for instance, in Germany, towards end consumers. So these power plants, they can be multiple types, especially when we talk about centralized power plants. They can be fuel-fired, hydroelectric dams, nuclear power plants, and they are used as of today and for many years to supply energy to the whole society pretty much, because we all need energy. So when we think about supply side management, it really is about the optimization of this process, the production, distribution, and transmission of energy to the end user. And this has been fairly, I wouldn't say simple in the past. Just to give you one idea of what could be supply side management today, is you have multiple different power plants who have different characteristics. Some are more efficient than others, some are ecologically or economically more feasible. And one strategy to do supply side, so basically is to adopt the order you use them to actually meet the needs. So if you have a need from society, from the grid, you turn on or you increase the capacity of a power plant that is just economically and ecologically most feasible, use it up, and then prioritize towards the most expensive and maybe someday also least ecologically friendly alternative. However, this is actually changing because of something we've been seeing, and that's the integration of renewable resources. And the integration of wind and solar, for instance, actually makes the supply side management far more difficult and complicated, and that's for two reasons. So one reason is that it is much more a decentralized nature. So oftentimes we have smaller and more solar and wind parks, and they also aren't as easy to turn on and off again whenever we need energy. So this is number 4, what you see here. So we kind of have to find new strategies and improve the way we actually supply energy. This can be partially done. There's one way that is technologically driven, and that's by incorporating energy storage solutions. So you basically store the energy and then you basically release it in a very simplistic way described into the grid whenever it's needed from the end users, that being us, industrial sides, or well, whoever you choose really. And the second method, and that's the method that is becoming increasingly more important, is actually demand side. And these are referred to 1 and 3. And the demand side of this is just all the consumers. It's you and I, it's industrial power, it's industrial factories, it's local businesses, hospitals, everyone, everywhere who uses energy. And the demand side management really refers to optimizing and adopting the use of energy in such a way that it is aligned with the supply we have provided through these new and sustainable energy resources. So just to say in a very simplistic way is we should turn on our washing machine when the sun shines. Of course, this is much more complicated, and there are different ways to leverage this. So we basically need a change of behavior, and people have increased awareness on a personal level, but then you also kind of need to provide the infrastructure and the technology to actually enable people to understand when it would be more feasible to use more energy, or actually turn down your energy use depending on how much of this renewable resource is available. And there are multiple ways. So you can have basically different energy is more expensive when it's dark and the wind is not blowing. You can have different incentives in industry, so they kind of get subsidized by turning off on and off their capacity. So there are multiple leverages, and very, very many stakeholders can be involved in this because every one of us uses energy in a certain way. So, and today we would like to try to have an overview and see who these stakeholders of different perspectives could be. Have I talked too much now?
That's great.
Yeah, and something I would like to, before we move on, often we read that demand side, as we've mentioned, is becoming increasingly more important, but it really is both. So, so we really have to think about a balance between demand side management and supply side management to actually foster this energy transition towards going fully renewable. So we kind of need both sides of this, but we see a transition from towards demand side, which up to now has not been spoken of very much because of the given circumstances. Yeah.
Changes are definitely happening on the supply side as well. I just read a report from the Nordic TSOs that they're also looking at creating, implementing kind of peak power plants, which we haven't really had the need for before, but are starting to see. Anya, do you want to take us into the different ways of mapping stakeholders?
Yes. So before we get a small introduction around what stakeholder maps are, we just want to get a bit of a feel in the room here if you have ever created a stakeholder map and what did you use it for. So just to share a bit with or amongst each other about our experiences would be great if you could write into the sticker. And for those who joined, you joined the Miro link and write in the sticker just for a minute if you have ever created a stakeholder map before, and also interested to know what was the purpose of creating a stakeholder map for you. Or even if you've never created a stakeholder map before, that's also totally fine. So we just take 1 minute to write. And I'll read it along the way. So mapping out my research space and stakeholders, inviting participants and considering their interests. Using it to identify growth drivers. And one is for an industrial database. And used it as a practice for this event. And understanding relationships and degree of stakeholder involvement. That's one of the key purposes as well. And using it to identify growth drivers. I already read that. Understanding the connections in agri-ecosystems. And let's see this one here, mapping for urban community for improving practices. Great. Thank you, everyone. And good to get to know all the different reasons of creating stakeholder maps. But what is a stakeholder map? And again, why are they used? So a stakeholder map is a visual representation. It can be used as a communication tool to understand the different levels of involvement of different stakeholders. And one might use it depending on the context in different levels. And one might use it in a rather broader context or a more specific context. So then for a more specific use. And one uses stakeholder maps as well to broaden one's understanding of the relationships and the dynamics between different stakeholders, which is also ever changing. And one might identify the diversity of relationships as well as possible knowledge gaps, which is always an interesting part if you're doing research. And also if you're doing strategy or building a strategy, one uses stakeholder maps and analysis to also provide some evidence on why the strategy might be a good to move onwards with, and also understand a broader network of power dynamics as well. So in general, we want to ask ourselves who are the key stakeholders and who are rather indirect stakeholders, and who influences who, and who are rather directly or indirectly connected and related. And that's just a brief introduction into what are stakeholder maps, why are they used. And we have some examples here of different stakeholder maps, which I will just briefly share with you, just so that we have a bit of an understanding what stakeholder maps might look like. The first one has been done for my thesis last year, and it is also quite user-centered, human-centered on a certain focus group. So that gave the different layers of this stakeholder map and different ways of identifying who's closer related to the key stakeholders and who's rather indirectly related to the stakeholders, but still has relevance in a certain context. And in this case, it was used for research purposes to designing intervention points. And then for this map, I wanted to see how one could intervene, and especially who would be directly affected by an intervention that one would design. And that's just a very brief introduction into that stakeholder map. The other stakeholder map I want to share with you is done by Hannah Hartwig, who's currently not here in this Zoom, but she allowed me to share her stakeholder maps very kindly. And she used these stakeholder maps to start conversations between different stakeholders in the Netherlands to answer the question, how can the province accelerate the transition to a circular economy of solar panels? And here she shares with us, when using this map with stakeholders, she shows it to one layer at a time from the inside to the outside, which are the variables. So she also used these stakeholder maps for her research as well, and as a communication tool. And I think most interesting around these stakeholder maps is really learning more about the dynamics of all of these different relationships and how they affect roles and also positions and influence other activities. And also just briefly want to mention Hannah's winter mapping school. She's also doing a winter mapping school, and there's a link below if you want to learn more. And Nikhil, who's also kindly shared an example of a stakeholder map, who's also in this room today. Nikhil, I believe that you can briefly share with us why you created a stakeholder map and briefly how you use it.
Thank you, Anya. This was basically created for my urban community, okay, where I reside. The objective was to have a regenerative system and to embrace circular economy. Basically, this was for an urban community, and it was a localized setting. The imperatives and motivations for effective waste management in a local urban community. So this was basically done. We have to map a lot of stakeholders, and you can see that stakeholders are rightly from people who have the power to influence and to make certain decisions. So there are stakeholders right from the local municipal bodies who have the power to make certain rules and regulations. They have the power to make policies, to give certain kind of tax rebates, coupons, so as to motivate individuals and the residents. I am the resident of the building, so it motivates me to effectively embrace the circular economic practice and to have and to see the other people involved in the stakeholder, right from the building members to the residents, to the gardeners, to the waste collectors, the people who generally give feedback. They're not the decision makers, but the people who give feedback so that we effectively we implement the best practices and see that um, the end objective is achieved. That is, we were able to create a regenerative system. At the same time, we were able to embrace the circular economic practice in the setting.
Thank you, Nikhil. And if anyone has any questions afterwards, gladly message Nikhil after the session. And we will now go into the introduction of the workshop. So for this workshop, we have prepared 3 different breakout rooms, and each room covers a different topic. The first room is held by Simon on a national and international level, and the second one held by Ivona on the local level, and then room 3 is focused on the user-centered case, user-centric level, so that will be in room number 3 with myself, and just briefly showing you the different rooms. Do you want to quickly give a mini introduction? Just to...
Right. This might look complex, but it really isn't. This is kind of taking both a generic and a specific approach to this. So talking about general terms of which kind of type of users are transitioning towards having a bigger stake in the system, but also looking at specific developments that are happening in different countries, different regulations, and so on, if we have examples thereof. If you're from the States, please don't feel excluded. This is just my map. We can certainly include elements from anywhere beyond this map. It's just something to put it on.
Great. And then Ivona's is on the local level. In case you want to add any comments, Ivona, feel free to do so.
Yeah, so local level. So this is supposed to just give you kind of an overview on the decentralized demand side management. Let's say something like that. So we would like to look into stakeholders who could be living in a city, for example, and everyone who actually could be involved in demand side management. So as a just kind of teaser, I've shown you on the top, you can really see kind of this value chain, as I said, starting from the supply towards the demand side. So this is supposed to be just an inspiration, going from a very individual level towards actually nationwide, but focusing on basically the local area people live in.
Great. And then room 3 is the user-centered level. So it really is about possibly whoever's in the room, the consumer perspective, and yeah, we will then share all of our experiences more on the experience level. So I believe I've opened up the breakout rooms, and it's self-selection. So I hope everyone can see the different rooms and choose room 1 or room 2 or room 3. And we shall come back in 20 minutes to share our learnings of this exercise. So everyone can join different room.
Yeah, just press breakout room down on the right-hand side of the bar and choose a room. Anya, do you stick around here and see that people are finding their way, or Jasmine perhaps? And I'll jump into the room now.
Yeah, great. Me too.
See you soon.
See you very soon. Quite short. Anyway, I hope that everyone had some good discussions going, and we can still encourage people to stay longer if they wish to. But officially, the event will end in 10 minutes around. So We shall go through each breakout room just to share one's insights of the discussion. Starting from Simon, this breakout room number 1 with Simon.
Yeah, I think we got caught up in trying to understand the differences and the political aspects of different energy markets. But to kind of answer the questions of future users of or stakeholders of demand side response, we got a couple. So one, for instance, is electrified construction sites, which has a huge power draw which they can actually control over, because sometimes you don't always need to charge at full capacity. More and more, the EU is pushing toward heat pumps, and we're seeing in certain parts of the world where if you install a heat pump, you basically have to have it be enabled to partake in some form of flexibility market, which is really interesting. But to do that, they also need to get the equipment manufacturers on board. So that's why I put OEMs here, which is actually where IKEA is located. Because imagine if all of the fridges that they sold were connected to their kind of smart home solutions, and they could be the supplying that service to local utility companies. That's the type of actors which are really having a growing stake in these forms of questions. And then at the same time, bigger sort of industry developments are really pushing this electrification, and thereby also being introduced as players in this short-term demand side management. We also talked about the gas, which Portugal, for instance, is heavily reliant on, where you also have to a certain extent demand side capabilities, but not to the same kind of minuscule time frame.
Great, thank you, Simon. Anyone wants to add anything, or otherwise I'll move to the next one in breakout room 2.
Is anyone keen to discuss this from my group, or shall I?
Nope, you do.
I mean, yeah, it was. I wish we had 4 times as more time, but that's okay. I mean, this is an open board, so we can just continue eventually, or just to play around, to be honest. So, well, I basically I just added basically a starting point, which was a homeowner with a heat pump, for instance. And what does this have to do with the demand side management? So a homeowner with a heat pump has an asset that can, an asset being the heat pump, who can be potentially requires quite a lot of energy, but it is also not necessarily for survival and can actually eventually be then turned on and off depending on, let's say, grid load. So we basically have like one of the main stakeholders at urban areas within demand side response are actually the transmission grid operators. Distribution. Sorry, that was my mistake. And what they basically do is they provide and run the infrastructure for electricity and gas pipelines as well to every house. And what they can do in the context of demand side management, for instance, is provide, in the case that the homeowner also has a smart meter installed, which is kind of a technology facilitator that they get through the distribution grid operator who buys it from a smart meter provider. They can actually provide the homeowner 2 different tariffs. Let's say, so one tariff is just being for electricity, one is being for just regular electricity that's been used every day. But the second one is, and that's the case for Germany, for instance. Second one can be just a cheaper tariff for the heat pump in exchange for actually being able to turn it on and off depending on the capacity of electricity available. So they kind of have somewhat control over your heat pump, and you provide the flexibility so that the transition to renewables become easier from a demand side perspective. And obviously, these things are quite expensive and require quite a lot of high upfront cost. So local banks are also involved, probably mostly for the homeowners to actually implement this, but also maybe even for other instances which we kind of need to check. Who could also be relevant municipality utilities that can actually provide the electricity through the grid, and then they are also related to either local or regional energy providers, or they have their own assets depending on what type of municipality they are, and they can be regional or nationwide. So this is how far we got, but there are still many, many more things you can actually talk about in the neighborhood and cities as well. So, but that's, I think, yeah, a nice starting point to expand on.
That's really great. Great start. I see, definitely. And then lastly, I'll go to the user-centric level. Here we started from, well, we have different ways of understanding a user. So here we just took a case study of an end user or consumer who consumes energy on an individual level in a living situation, and then we mapped out from that user-centric point of view possible gadgets a user uses in a living situation, and from a user's perspective, we identified actually a lot of knowledge gaps of which gadgets we use, then who's involved, who has a stake in that is the retailer of those gadgets that one purchases, and also the brands standing behind all of those gadgets, such as a laptop, and the brand behind the laptop, they have a stake on in the user stakeholder map. And then indirectly related are all of those stakeholders that are involved in possible production of that gadget, for example, so manufacturers and third-party supply chains. And there we already identified that a lot of users might not know anything around the brands behind the gadgets that they use. And so, yeah, I guess in our stakeholder map, we identified multiple knowledge gaps. So from that user-centric point of view, that was quite interesting. And then we have a case of a solar panel use case where Ever was doing a...
Right. So, I mean, that was just interesting observation that arose, because I can only speak on behalf of the Indian context. Again, very regional and hyper-local. But what's happening within the Indian context is, so with the COP26 and the UN, the general international climate agreements, the Indian government has pushed for more renewable energy resources. And that has trickled down to the state governments and then further to local governments. And when it finally ends up with the end users, you see these two clear divisions. There's the general electricity department, the traditional one that agrees that it can just go on in its old ways, and then it's got another department that is doing renewable energy research and giving you subsidy schemes and such sort of things. But the interesting thing is, why are they not integrated at an integral level, and shouldn't the renewable energy sector become the core of the traditional energy sector as such? So especially for rising economies where we are still 20 or 30 years behind the emerged economies. So yeah, but it's quite a macro level observation again.
Great, thank you. And I think it was great to share all of our insights and different ways we approach these maps. And unfortunately, we've reached the end of this session already in terms of timing. but feel free to stay on if you wish, and if you have any further questions. We encourage people to get in touch with us, also with the team, and if you're not part of the SI network, then we also have the links here to join the SI Energy Hub. And here is also a LinkedIn to also be in touch. Do feel free to add any feedback here in the sticker notes below, how you experience this event. If there's anything you wish to see in the next event, or if you want to see any ways we can improve this event, definitely we would wish to add more time to the actual mapping workshop for sure. And also, if you want to share a case study, we also welcome those case studies or discussions, and share your contact details below, or also in the Miro board, you can also share your contact details or resources. And that's already the end of this workshop, unfortunately, but feel free to stay if you have any questions